Hi, everybody. This is Hyperwave, and it's a very special show. Not only do we have Socrates on, but actually, we're going to be unveiling the Seljen trading system for the first time ever. So I will actually just let the boys talk the entire time. I will stop right now. But Socrates, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on. It's great to see you both.
Thank you. And Tyler, what is this craziness that you finally decided to unveil to the world?
Well, as some of you know, Socrates, Leah, and I are going to do a webinar in about a week or so on Saturday, June the 1st. And actually, both of them are going to be with me in person in Chattanooga. So we'll have a lot of fun. It's going to be from 12 o'clock to 4 o'clock. But what we want to do is we want to spend some time in some of these vlogs explaining what the heck this thing is and why now. The most important thing is the why now question. And that'll take a while to explain. But all we're going to do is we're going to start by just giving you a little background of where this thing came from. You can read about it briefly on our website, lucidinvestmentstrategies.com. Just go to webinar, and under the Seljen trading system, there will be a brief description. And basically what it says is this thing was first found back in the late 1940s by the same guys we talk about all the time, two professors, Edwards and McGee, in their book, The Technical Analysis of Stock Prices. You can buy that on Amazon, and just they named it broadening top. They did mention it as a broadening bottom also, but it's really been used for years and years and years as a topping formation, which makes it very interesting. About 20 years later, Wells Wilder Jr. did a lot of work on it for commodities. Edwards and McGee had done it basically observing the stock market, but Wells Wilder Jr. developed it further, having to do with commodity prices. And I did attend his seminar and learned about it and became intrigued with it. And then another individual by the name of Dick Self, and I spent about a year analyzing all kinds of charts, and we found out not only were there broadening tops, but there's also broadening bottoms. And then we spent about a year doing a lot of statistical work, and then we named what we did the Seljen trading system all the way back in the late 1970s. And I've been using it ever since. He also used it as a commodity trading tool. We both used it together to trade our own money and also clients' money during the late 70s and early 80s, only in the commodity market. So this thing's been around for a long, long, long time. Nobody talks about it anymore. I've seen 2 or 3 people, analysts on Wall Street, every once in a while talk about it. I've seen a couple of articles that talk around it sort of in Barron's and even in Investment Business Daily. But there's actually a way to use it as a system for looking at tops and bottoms. Now, it's not particularly good in between. That's not what it's designed for. It's designed to find when something is running out of gas. Now, the sequential trading system is designed to do the same thing, but not ultimate tops and ultimate bottoms. It doesn't tell you, is this an ultimate top or an ultimate bottom? That this I'm talking about is the sequential trading system. It just says when you get a certain kind of account that runs up to a 9, that means that the tank is out of gas for a while, and until that tank gets filled up, there's no more gas to drive it further, or a rocket fuel, or any metaphor you want to use. And the same thing on the downside. The sequential system that Tone and others use is fabulous for doing that. But as you all know from listening to Tone, you can get a 9 and then a pullback of 1 to 4, then another 9 and a pullback of 1 to 4. It's not really looking for ultimate tops and bottoms. Now, as you've heard Leah and I talk about for a year and a half, and now I've exposed Socrates to this, and I'll let him speak for himself, but when he started looking around, he was amazed at what he saw, and he pointed out a bunch of things going on right now to me that I was not aware of. And the reason I wasn't aware of is I've been spending an awful lot of time with Hyperwave and Consensio and doing webinars and vlogs and trading a lot of different things in a lot of different ways. And the idea of a top or a bottom, a major top or a bottom, just hadn't occurred to me for a long time. I used it back in 07, 08, 09. I used it at the top in 06 and 07. And I used it back in early 2000, and then on a number of other occasions as a timing tool, where what you're doing is you're waiting and waiting and waiting for this really weird pattern to appear. And then even when it appears, you end up staring at it and counting it and recounting it. I sent a couple of them to Socrates, and he sent something back to me saying, I just can't find this count anywhere on two different topping formations. And so I said, okay, let's do a screen share. And we looked at one of them, and I said, here it is. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And he goes, oh my God, I missed that. I didn't even see that. Then we looked at the other one, and I said, here it is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And he said, I still don't see it. And I said, well, let me look a little closer. And then I looked a little closer, and I couldn't find it. So what I'm telling you is this thing that you're about to see briefly, and unfortunately, I've got an interview to do at 5 o'clock in 45 minutes. So we're going to go over the basics with you. We're going to show you what this pattern is on a top and a bottom. And then I will give you some ideas so that you understand why and how it is used. It is very, very powerful. But like other things, like Hyperwave, just because it's a very powerful tool doesn't mean you can say, okay, I'm going to apply Hyperwave to this. Unless there's a Hyperwave there, you can't apply it. It's a meaningless thing. It just sits there. Until you find one of them, you can't use it. Now, which are more common? Seljen tops and bottoms or Hyperwaves? I don't know the answer to that. But we will find that out. I kind of think that there are a lot more tops and bottoms. We have found 30 of them just in the last week and a half that we've started looking for them that we're going to use in our webinar. Not only important ones in the past, finding tops on Amazon and bottoms on Amazon, but current ones, and a couple of very big, scary current ones that are going on right now, which is why I set up and started only talking about Seljen and the fact we needed to do a webinar. So anyway, that's the brief introduction. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Socrates to pull up an archetype. Just like we have an archetype of a Hyperwave, there is an archetype of a Seljen top and a Seljen bottom. And I will let him go to screen share and bring that up, and then we will both talk about it. And then I'm going to bring up a couple of real-time examples, one with General Electric that I actually played myself not too long ago, and also of Google, which I have not played because I just found it. Okay, so Socrates, you're up.
All right. Are you able to see my screen okay?
Yep, great.
All right. So yeah, this is the kind of archetype of the, this would be a broadening bottom. And this is going to be kind of familiar to a lot of people who are familiar with the broadening bottom pattern or the megaphone pattern. This is going to look very familiar with you with these kind of higher highs and lower lows occurring kind of following each other. You've got lower low, higher high, lower low, higher high. and that's where you get the touch points with the numbers, starting with 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5. And that is essentially an archetype for all three patterns: the Seljen, the broadening bottom, or the megaphone. As Tyler mentioned, I was very intrigued with the Seljen system after he explained it to me, because I had originally just kind of thought that it was no different than a megaphone pattern or a broadening bottom. I didn't really understand that there was a significant difference there. So this is the archetype for kind of both, but there are some very specific intricacies that Seljen will look for that the megaphone pattern will not. And like I said, like Tyler said at the beginning, I was intrigued for a number of reasons. That the first one was the differences between Seljen and the broadening bottom and the megaphone pattern. And the other reason that I became very interested was just noticing how many of these patterns occurred at the bottom in 2008, 2009. There were broadening bottoms kind of all over the place. And now we have started to see broadening tops occur, sometimes in the same assets. So to me, that is very interesting, because like Tyler said, these are this is kind of a system that's designed to capture the very top and the very bottom. If you think about it, like often a football field will be used as the analogy, and broadening tops and bottoms will generally only occur within the 10-yard line of each end of the football field. So that really leaves you kind of handcuffed for the rest of the field. If you're just using broadening tops, they're really not going to occur when you're in the middle of a trend. Where you really want to be trading is when that trend is really strong. You're in the middle of the field. Whereas this pattern will work very well for when you get to the very terminal points of either a bear market or a bull market. And the main reason why I'm finding this so intriguing is because of how well it can complement Consensio. Consensio is designed to capture the 90% of the field that you're wanting to get in and be in a trend the whole time. That's what Consensio is designed for. Consensio isn't really going to get you in or out on the first 10% or the last 10%, because it's waiting for more signs and confirmations of a reversal. So if you have that tool at your disposal to manage the football field between basically the 20s, the meat of the field, where you're really wanting to capitalize on that trend, if you've got Consensio to implement there, and then you complement it with Seljen to potentially identify the very terminal points, it can be just a very powerful trading system when you complement them together. So
that's great. Maybe if you could pull up the same thing for a top. Do you have that one?
I do not have that one worked up yet.
Okay, no problem. And how about, I think I saw that you had just what each of those numbers represent relative to bars or candles. In other words, a low candle with higher candles on either side, or a high candle with lower candles on either side. Do you have that?
I think I know what you're talking about. Let's see if this is it. Is that what you're thinking?
Perfect.
Dive into it, or do you want to?
Please, why don't you pull it up? And that also shows a top, which will be good, because that's, if everybody just keeps in mind that archetype bottom we just looked at, this is an archetype top. If you could, let me just see, can we see that one? There it is. Okay. So why don't you describe 4? Let me just first say, this is what a top looks like. Now, on that first chart at the bottom, you didn't see the individual candles. You just saw the numbers. Here, the numbers are reversed. First of all, you've got a high, which is a number 1. Then you've got a low, which is a number 2. Then you've got another high that must be above the 1. And then it drops down to a number 4, which must be below the 2. Then you go up to a number 5, which must be above the 3, which was above the 1. And that is the archetype top of a Seljen trading signal. Now, I'll turn it back to you to describe what's in that yellow ellipse, because this is the important thing about broadening tops, megaphones, and the Seljen trading system. The only way you can place a number is if this particular thing happens. Okay, Socrates, why don't you explain it?
So yeah, that is going to be one of the main differences between the Seljen system and the Megaphone, or the broadening top. Here, this one is a broadening top. It's like we see we have the 3 touch points on top. The 1, 3, and 5 are on top, and the 2 and the 4 are below. So that's what gives us the top. And instead of just using the trend lines to identify the where the kind of higher highs come in, that's generally what the broadening pattern and the Megaphone will do, is just draw trend lines and then wait for it to get to that next touch point of the trend line, whereas Seljen is more focused on candlesticks and uses a 3 candlestick pattern to identify the area, the counts. So for number 5, what we have here is essentially this 3 candle pattern where you have a high that is in between a lower high and another lower high. So that is enough to give us this 5 count, as long as this high is higher than this high. So that's the 3 candlestick pattern we're looking for. Right here in the highlighted yellow circle, you'll notice that this 3 candlestick pattern is actually kind of on both areas. Like right here, we've got a high with a lower high and a lower high. So if you had this exact candle setup up here, then it would count for a number up here, a 1, a 3, or a 5. But on the other hand, we've got a low with a higher low and a higher low, which is good enough to get a count down here, as long as this low is lower than this low, which we can see that it barely is. So there will be times where it barely gets lower than the prior low, but it will still qualify based on Seljen due to this candlestick pattern. If this goes on, well, that'll make it a little too complicated, but essentially this is the way that Seljen is determining the counts, opposed to just touching a trend line.
Great. That's exact. That's perfect. And that'll allow me to bring up some stuff in just a second, where we'll look at 2 examples that are alive right now. But it's not complicated. This is one of the simplest things in technical analysis. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 1 must be below the 3. The 3 must be below the 5. The 2 must be the beginning point, followed by a 4, which is going to be lower than it. But all the numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, have the characteristic that Socrates just explained. Take a look at 1. The high on the number 1 is higher than the candle to the right of it, and higher than the candle to the left of it. Look at the number 2. The number 2 is lower than the candle to the left of it and lower than the candle to the right of it. Number 3 is higher than the candle to the left of it and higher than the candle to the right of it. Number 4, the same thing. Number 5, the same thing. That's it. That's everything you need to know to go out and make billions of dollars. It's really that simple. What isn't simple is finding these stupid things, because number one, this is, just think about what you're looking at for a second. This one occurred in a very short time period. Some of them, the entire pattern is 2 years long. And what I use is I use weekly candles, and to get various signals that we'll talk about in the webinar, and to place stops, which I will show you in the webinar. What you need is, you've got to find these things that are exactly like this archetype. They cannot vary in any way. And because there's no room for compromise, that makes it very simple. What makes it very difficult is taking the time to look at it, because a lot of them are not readily evident. So if you pull that off, I'm going to pull up two examples.
Can I interject with a couple questions as we go with this show?
Of course, yeah.
May be helpful. All right, Ryan, Socrates, please keep your chart up for a second. And it has, everybody, I know it's loud, sorry. It says monthly, but some people are just asking, what is the time frame?
Yeah, it can be used on any time frame. I use it in Seljen only on weekly. You know how I love weekly and weekly closes. But in searching for them, we have found, Socrates and I have found, that starting with a monthly is great. Only because it takes 4 weekly bars and puts it into one. And then when you switch over to the weekly, you can find the distinction of exactly where the high was made relative to the other weekly bars. So you can use it over any time frame, but you will learn in the webinar why and how. The weekly is what I use to trade off of. As Leah pointed out, this is a monthly chart. We could show a 10-minute chart, and the same thing applies.
Great. And one last question before we move off, because that's a beautiful chart. A lot of people asking about Elliott waves. How is this different from specifically on this one, which I think is great. How is this different from an Elliott triangle wave that's bearish with 3 tops and 2 bottoms?
Very similar, but Elliott doesn't need the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 the way we've got it. All you need is a single point as a high above or below to get a count. There are similarities to all patterns across all technical signals. A lot of people have asked about hyperwaves and Elliott waves, and we talked to Hyejin Lee about that. I talked to Robert Prechter about that. There are similarities, but it's important to understand the distinctions. So the best way to understand distinctions is to completely understand one system and all of the rules, and then branch out from there. If you try to mix them, you're going to get very mixed up, of course.
All right, let's keep going.
Okay, great. I will pull up a couple of charts, and we will start with, those were great, Socrates, thanks. We will start with this one. Right here. This is one that I traded myself not too long ago, and a number of people in our Telegram channel know that because I talked about it. A couple of people also traded it along with me. I don't make those things public for a number of reasons, but the biggest reason being that I can only trade things that I'm not trading for my discretionary fiduciary accounts. So I have to pick these weird things out. What I've got with these arrows is a broadening bottom on a weekly basis of General Electric. Now, General Electric is an unbelievably interesting chart for a million reasons having to do with hyperwaves, and this is a hyperwave, and we're looking for lows way down here at $2, and here is why so many people are confused about what we're doing with Bitcoin. this is all a phase 7 of a hyperwave, even though it goes all the way up and then comes all the way down, but doesn't make the final low, kind of the way Bitcoin got to 3,000 but didn't hit 1,000, then came all the way up. All of that is one hyperwave. It's also a very unusual pattern, obviously, that here's one of the preeminent companies in the world since the 1920s that went into a hyperwave in the 1920s and 30s. It doesn't show on this chart. This was back in 1999, and we're still screwing around many years later. But here at this end, I just happened to see, and I was looking at a couple of other things besides Seljen, this pattern. Now I'm going to blow this up so you can see I don't have numbers on it. I just put arrows. But you can see that this is a 5 bottom, a 4, a 3, a 2, a 1. And let's just take it step by step in identifying these. You wouldn't really look at this chart and say, oh, that's what Socrates and Tyler just explained. It is. This is a weekly chart. Look at this right here. This is a low, which is lower than the one on the left and lower than the one on the right. So we can put a 1 there. I've got a blue arrow. This is a high just 2 weeks later. Why? It's higher than the one on the left and higher than the one on the right. Here's a new low, lower than one on the left, lower than the one on the right, and lower than number 1, the first one. This is a 3, 1, 2, 3. Here's a 4, higher than the one on the left, higher than the one on the right, and higher than number 2. And finally, right here on December the 10th is a 5, which is the bottom of a megaphone pattern. It's a bottom of a broadening bottom, and it's a bottom of a Seljen trading system. Why is this a 5? Because it's lower than the candle on the right and lower than the candle on the left. And based on that and other things, as Socrates said, it's great to use other techniques. And as many of you know, I use many techniques. But this is one that I happened to look at and so bought. So I was in at $7. I thought maybe we could get up to $8. There was also a count on sequential that I found interesting, because we came down to a 7 and then an 8, and then we got a 1, then we got a 2 above a 1. So you don't need to do that. You can just use the system by itself, but using Consensio, using sequential, using other things that most of you have learned from us in our vlogs and if you're in our Telegram groups, gave a very low risk buy, and then you pick what you want to do with it. Well, I actually wrote it up to 9, and on this candle I said this is too good to be true, and so I jumped out of it. Just a short-term scalp over about a 5 or 6, 7 week period, and it worked out very nicely. Now, is this the ultimate bottom of this range? That's the question. When you are in a downtrend, now remember, this is occurring when the stock market and everything else is going up, and this thing is falling like a rock. That's very interesting to me, and so I would be looking for a bottom in something that's been going down and down and down. By the way, this is what happens when this thing really wants to go down, and what happens when it really wants to go up. But I just take a second, and then we don't have a whole lot more time, but you should be able to reproduce everything that we've just talked about, because it's really that simple. But now, here's what's interesting to me about broadening tops and bottoms. What is it telling you about the war between bulls and bears? And why is it so rare that you get this particular pattern? I don't know. But here's my thinking on it. The bears have been in control forever. And then all of a sudden, you get this one down here with bars on both sides that are above it. And then immediately following, in other words, the bulls are trying to take over. And they get as far as 2 weeks later, and then you get two lower bars below this one, and then the bears take over. And then you get this one, and on either side, higher bars, and the bulls take over. And then the bears take over. And finally, because of the count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this tug of war between opposing sides, just like when you get a 9 on sequential, gives way. And that becomes a bottom. There's a way of placing stops below this. This is fascinating. It's part of the Seljen system. It's not part of the other systems. And we will go into great detail about that in the webinar for a lot of reasons that I think you'll find interesting. Okay. Yeah.
Keep going, Ty. We're actually getting some really good questions. And before you run as well, I want to make sure that, of course, we're able to pull up Bitcoin, which I can have Socrates do, and just chat about it really quickly. But keep on going, Alphabet.
This one is very interesting. And I did not see this until Socrates and I started our search. This, of course, is Google. And this has just occurred. This is a top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and now we are breaking. What Seljen, broadening top, and Megaphone says is that is the top of this run. I don't know what that means fundamentally. I don't know what it means for the FANG stocks. All I know is when something this important gives this signal, I am going to be interested in either avoiding it on the long side or playing it. Now, what's important is you've got to check all the highs and lows precisely. And one of the things Socrates kept finding, and I found over and over again, is these things will go to the very tick between points such as this point and this point. So you have to put your cursor on it and see that that high was 1289.27 and this high was, wow, 1273.89. So this high is higher and it gets a 5. But you will find over and over again where not only the bar to the left or the right is to the tick the same, but also in between the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the same thing will happen. This one did not. This is a completed Seljen top. And all you know is it's going to go lower. Now let's put sequential on top of it. And this is also very interesting. We come up to an 8 and the break is on the 9. You will find in many examples that does not occur. But when it does, now you've got two very high probability systems telling you the same thing. So this is just an introduction, but we wanted to whet your appetite so that in the days to come, you can experiment. We will do 2 or 3 vlogs on this subject in more detail leading up to the webinar, but it's going to take us the full 4 hours to show you the many examples of unbelievable tops and bottoms over the last 20 years, plus give you a big list of ones that we have found that are active right now. So to me, this is very, very exciting. And it's one of the 4 proprietary systems that I use frequently. We have already had workshops on Hyperwave. We've had webinars on Consensio. We're going to do another webinar on Consensio coming up in the near future, which will be trading Consensio instead of just all of the details of how and why they're constructed, with a lot of examples. But anyway, with that, I am going to...
So Socrates, you want to pull up Bitcoin? And in the meantime, Tyler, I can ask you a couple questions.
Okay, that'll be great.
You don't need a chart for, and I think are very good. Again, sorry, everybody, it's quite loud. Tyler, which I think this is really good. Well, actually, let's start with one. What is the objective in using the Seljen trading system? Oh, you know, we just lost Tyler, didn't we?
Well, I could try my best to answer that, and maybe he can chime in when he gets back on. But the objective, as far as I understand it, for Seljen is to identify ultimate tops and ultimate bottoms. It really can't be used outside of that. It isn't. It's not best suited for anything outside of that, as far as I understand. So it can be a powerful tool to identify trend exhaustion, and that is the objective as I understand it.
Perfect. And Tyler, I'll throw another one at you that's a little different, because I think Socrates just nailed that, and you can tie it back in.
Great.
Which is very important. How does this stream correlate to our last stream?
In many, many ways. One of the reasons we wanted to do a stream on all the principles is because all the tools I use are based on those principles. What this one is doing, the Seljen trading system, it's looking for a place to get back into cash. And that's what a broadening top is, or a Seljen top. And it attempts to do it as close to the top as you can. Sometimes things like Consensio will get you out, but Hyperwave, if there is a Hyperwave, got you out before Consensio. Sometimes Consensio will get you in, like it did on Bitcoin on the upside, because Hyperwave, until it either gets to 1,000 or back up to 19,666, doesn't give you any signals. You're flying blind, so you need other tools. So this tool is designed to do one thing: slap you in the face and say every up move is going to come to an end, and you've got to be looking for it. Every down move is going to come to an end, and you've got to be looking for it. And here's a tool that will help you identify it.
And what % accuracy do you think that the Seljen provides in calls?
Wells Wilder said he was 80% accurate on calling bottoms and tops in the commodity market. We tested it in the commodity market. We traded 42 different commodities on a daily basis for 2 years using only one system, which was Seljen. And we did it very, very successfully. There aren't enough of them, and I have not used enough of them to give you any statistics other than what Wells Wilder did. And anyone that studied the RSI and the ADX and the directional movement and the stop and reverse points knows that that man did very in-depth research before he came out with his algorithms. So I assume that the numbers he threw out to me back in the 70s are accurate numbers.
I like it. All right. Bitcoin dumping a tiny bit. I'll start with you, Socrates. What are you seeing? And then Tyler, I'll end with you because I have to jump on an interview.
Okay, good.
What's up?
All right. Yeah, I've been, like probably almost everybody else, paying very close attention to the price movements of Bitcoin. So a couple things I can point out. First is just my main areas of horizontal resistance, which are just based on the prior highs that were established in 2018. These are the three kind of major areas that I'm looking at. If we can make it through here, the 82 resistance, then we should test about 96 to potentially 99, even 10,000. And then the next one up from there is 11.5, which has a wick up to about 11.6. So this is just helping me to understand where the next areas of resistance will be if we do break out. I'm not saying that I think that will necessarily happen, at least based on this chart. And I have been following the 4-hour chart very closely. When the markets are moving fast, I like to zoom in. When in doubt, zoom out. When the thing's moving in one direction in a fast way, then I think it's time to zoom in. So I've been keeping my eye on this trend line here. I'm trying to get it drawn just right. So right about here, we've got a handful of touch points. It's been finding support from this area pretty nicely. And I made a post on TradingView and Twitter a couple days ago pointing out a potential cup and handle or inverse head and shoulders that would confirm with a break above my major area of horizontal resistance. What I liked seeing about this is that the target from the cup and handle roughly lined up with the next area of major horizontal resistance. So I'm kind of discounting this wick for the measured move due to that being a bit of a flash crash sort of situation. So zooming out here and moving that to here, and we notice if we get that right above, kind of depending on where you put the neckline of this, that measured move could be even that high. So that's very closely in line with my next area of major horizontal resistance. So that's something that I have been keeping a close eye on. Actually have an order set on the books at 84.51. It's a stop market buy order to buy this breakout. If we do get up here, I think that's high enough to avoid a bull trap. I may be wrong. Maybe we never get up there. In that case, the order doesn't trigger, and I'll cancel it if we end up breaking down this trend line. The reason I like that for the most part is a pretty good risk reward, and I think that it wouldn't take very long to get there if we are able to confirm this pattern. I really was kind of wanting us to see this move up from here. It looked like we'd kind of established support and we were moving up to test this area. That didn't happen. It's broken down. We've come to retest this trend line. So this is an area that I think is very important for the next at least couple days. If this trend line breaks down, then I'm really expecting a return down to the at least the 200 moving average on the 4-hour chart. These are my preferred areas of support. I like seeing the 50 EMA in line with this trend line. And then this would be my next area for support if we do end up breaking down, and I would probably be looking at entering in right around the 6,600, 6,575 area of if this does end up breaking down. And that's what I got.
Terrific. And I would agree with all of that. We've got buys down at 66, 65, 68, all the way down to 62. A lot of them have been filled for clients that took our advice before the flash crash. And I agree with what Socrates just said, that this is very critical right here, right now. If we drop a little bit more down from here, there's not a lot of support, and we should at least test those regions. That would be a time to look to add positions. From the point of view of that's what I would be doing. And if anybody wants to follow along, that is your own decision. But there's a lot of reason to think that 6,000 to 6,800 area could support it. We've got stops right below 6,000 though, because if that's taken out, we're going much lower than that. And with that, I have to run. Thank you very much.
With that, Are you gonna say Happy Pizza Day?
What's that?
Are you gonna say Happy Pizza Day?
Absolutely.
Socrates, you know why yet?
I don't think I do. No.
Guys, it's Bitcoin Pizza Day. It's the first.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh. I like it. I like it a lot.
First ever transaction from that ever took place, but it's like, yeah, okay, we won't even talk about how much. I mean, he paid what, 10,000 bitcoins, I think, for a pizza. So poor guy, but not really. That was awesome.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Remember the webinar. Maybe you just want to maybe even bring that up and let people see where and how to do that. I've got to run. Thank you. Bye-bye.